Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Melissa Calusinski? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Melissa Calusinski was born on October 4, 1986, and lived in Lincolnshire, Illinois. This town is just north of Chicago. There is a town with the same name in Britain, which is pronounced Lincolnshire, but evidently the town in Illinois is pronounced Lincolnshire for some reason. Melissa was the youngest of 5 siblings. As far as her academics, Melissa did not perform well. Her overall IQ was 82, which is over 1 standard deviation below the mean. IQ tests have a mean of 100 and a standard deviation of 15. This puts her at the 12th percentile. Put another way, 88% of the population has an IQ score higher than 82. Melissa's verbal score was 74, which corresponds to the 4th percentile. Despite her academic struggles, Melissa graduated from high school in 2005 and attended college for 3 months. She lived with her parents, although sometimes she stayed with her boyfriend. As far as money-earning activity, Melissa had a few different jobs related to retail and food service. She also performed babysitting and worked as a nanny, taking care of 5 boys. In 2007, she started working full-time as a teacher's assistant at the Mini-Subi Daycare in Arlington Heights, Illinois. About a year later, she transferred to another daycare center in Lincolnshire. One of the children in her class at the daycare was named Ben Kingen. He had been born on August 31, 2007. His parents were named Amy and Andy Kingen. He had a twin sister named Emily, as well as older siblings. When Ben was 9 weeks old, he, along with his sister, began attending the daycare where Melissa worked. Both Ben and Emily were in the classroom where Melissa assisted the teacher. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Wednesday, January 14, 2009, Ben went to the daycare as usual. In the afternoon, Melissa left the classroom to use the restroom as a worker named Nancy Callinger looked after the children. Sometime between 3:35 and 3:45 p.m., Nancy saw Ben throw himself backward on the tiled kitchen floor in the classroom. Nancy did not actually see his head hit the floor, but Ben cried a little, therefore she assumed it did. After this, she placed Ben in a bouncy chair. At this point, Melissa returned to the classroom and Nancy left for a few minutes to take dishes to the main kitchen. Melissa was the only worker in the classroom with Ben and the other children. At 3:50 p.m., Melissa realized that Ben was unresponsive in the bouncy seat and called for assistance. Daycare workers called 911 at 3:51 p.m. and performed CPR until paramedics arrived and transported Ben to a hospital in Libertyville. Medical staff found him unresponsive and believed that he had suffered a significant head injury. He was pronounced dead at 4:50 p.m. Ben was 16 months old. Here's what the police found during the course of their investigation. Ben had a worrisome habit that manifested when he was angry. He would violently throw himself backward from a sitting position and strike his head on the floor. On October 27, 2008, 2.5 months before he died, Ben woke up from a nap at the daycare with a bump on the back of his head. This bump was the size of a golf ball. His mother took him to a physician who advised her that nothing needed to be done. 2 days later, he was examined by a different physician after developing a fever of 103.5 degrees. This physician found swelling, but no skull fracture. On January 12, 2009, 2 days before he died, Ben started vomiting at the daycare. His mother, Amy, kept him home on January 13. He seemed fine that day. Physicians consulted by the police said that Ben did not have any medical condition that would have caused his death. He died from blunt force trauma to the head and must have been killed by another person. The police briefly spoke to Melissa right after Ben was taken to the hospital. She said that Ben became fussy and antsy after having a snack during the afternoon. At about 3:45 p.m., Melissa noticed that Ben was lethargic. Then she observed foam coming from Ben's nose and mouth. This is when she requested assistance. On January 16, 2009, 2 days after Ben died, the police interviewed Melissa from 9:30 a.m. until 7 p.m. She unwisely agreed to talk to them without an attorney. This would be a costly mistake for her. Initially, Melissa denied knowing what happened to Ben. Throughout the entire interview, she denied involvement in his death about 70 times. At 1:25 p.m., she changed her story, telling the police that Ben threw himself backward from a sitting position and struck his head. Again, Ben had a habit of doing this. The police left the interrogation room, returning at 3 p.m. They told Melissa that an expert physician said that Ben could not have injured himself in that way. Melissa changed her story again. Now she said that Ben hit his head on a wooden chair after she accidentally dropped him from a height of 12 to 18 inches. The police left the room again, returning at 4:10 p.m. They told Melissa that the physician ruled out her last story. At this point during the interview, Melissa stated that she became frustrated with Ben due to his fussiness and threw him onto the tile floor. Melissa was arrested and charged in connection with Ben's death. On November 16, 2011, after a 2-week trial, she was found guilty of first-degree murder. On February 23, 2012, she was sentenced to 31 years in prison. Melissa appealed her conviction, but it was upheld on July 11, 2018. Her projected release date is December 30, 2039, when she will be 53 years old. Now moving to my analysis. Melissa maintains her innocence, and she has a massive quantity of supporters. Her defense strategy contains 2 arguments. The first argument is that Melissa falsely confessed. The second argument is that Ben died from a rebleed of a chronic subdural hematoma. This rebleed was caused by his frequent head-banging activity. The state, of course, disagrees. They argued that Ben died because Melissa threw him onto the tile floor with enough force to cause a skull fracture. This is consistent with the statement that she eventually made to the police after being interviewed for many hours. This brings me to the question, was Melissa guilty of murder? Let's take a look at the evidence both for and against the idea that she was guilty, starting with the inculpatory factors. Melissa was the only worker in the classroom when Ben became unresponsive. She eventually told the police that she threw Ben onto the tile floor. Experts for the state testified that Ben had a visible skull fracture. It could be seen with the naked eye. The fracture went all the way through his skull and occurred shortly before he became symptomatic. The fracture must have been inflicted by another person. Ben could not have generated enough force by himself to cause the injuries he sustained. His habit of throwing himself backward onto the floor would not have caused the injuries. The cause of death was the skull fracture. Contrary to the defense theory, Ben did not have a chronic subdural hematoma. He did vomit repeatedly 2 days before he died. There's no doubt about that, but this was unrelated to his death. Moving to the exculpatory factors, Melissa had no criminal record. She never received any complaints about her performance during her time as a nanny. She also never received complaints during her time at the daycare. She was described as a quiet, peaceful, and kind-hearted kid who would never be violent. Experts for the defense testified that Ben had a chronic subdural hematoma that was a few months old, which could have been exacerbated by a short fall. He died due to a rebleed from that hematoma. A golf ball-sized bump was found on Ben's head about 2.5 months before he died, which supports this theory. Contrary to the state's assertion, there was no skull fracture. Ben had a skull defect. It could have been an abnormal suture, which mimicked a fracture. Ben did not have a visible injury on his skin where the skull fracture was supposedly located. The coroner who originally handled the case admitted that he missed an older head injury that Ben had sustained. Furthermore, x-rays of Ben's head went missing and were only found after an anonymous tip. The x-rays did not show a skull fracture. On July 8, 2015, the Lake County coroner at the time reclassified Ben's manner of death from homicide to undetermined. As far as the confession that Melissa offered to the police, there are many reasons to believe it was false. For example, Melissa had low overall IQ and very low verbal IQ. She was highly suggestible and eager to please. It's clear from the interview that Melissa wanted to tell the police something useful and did not understand how they weren't on her side. The officers used several tactics designed to manipulate, mislead, deceive, frighten, exhaust, and intimidate Melissa. For example, they interviewed her for 9.5 hours. They repeatedly lied to her, claiming they were basing their accusations on science. One of them slammed his hand on the table. They kept telling her they did not want to put her in jail, and no one was leaving until they obtained the facts. They said that if she told the truth, they could all go home, and let's get this over with and move on. Melissa denied being involved in Ben's death about 70 times. When considering the evidence in this case, do I believe that Melissa Calusinski was guilty of murder? In my opinion, she was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. If one were to believe that Ben did not have a skull fracture, which of course was hotly debated by the experts, then Melissa did not kill him. Nobody killed him. He died from a pre-existing injury that was aggravated by a relatively minor self-induced blow to the head. If one were to believe that Melissa falsely confessed, then she may have killed him, but there is no way to prove that without a valid confession. There were other people in the daycare who could have injured Ben. Just because someone is not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt doesn't necessarily mean they are not guilty in reality. Which brings me to my next question. Do I believe it is more likely than not that Melissa killed Ben? This is a tough question that I have gone back and forth on. I don't know. If I had to guess, I would say that she was. After all, she was with Ben right before he became symptomatic, and she did confess. Perhaps her confession was genuine. Melissa lost her temper and threw Ben onto the tile floor. Maybe the skull fracture was actually there, but not visible. There's no way to know for certain. It's a testament to how weak the state's case is, that the balance of probabilities issue is hotly debated and not the standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. One could make a good argument that, at the very least, Melissa should be given a new trial. Now moving to my final thoughts. What lessons can be learned from this case? There's not really a clear lesson related to Ben's death because nobody knows what actually happened. I guess the lesson could be something like daycare facilities should have cameras. A simple fix like that would have definitely solved this entire mystery. The lesson from Melissa's perspective is a lot easier to identify. It is critical never to talk to the police without an attorney. Police interviewing tactics are manipulative, dishonest, and reckless. Investigators do not worry about taking advantage of someone who is at a disadvantage for any reason, including cognitive limitations or other mental health concerns. They are not looking for justice. They are looking for a confession, and a false confession will suit them just fine. Those are my thoughts on the case of Melissa Calusinski. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.